Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program tonight, a major terror attack in Jammu. 5 Indian Army soldiers are ambushed. There's a grenade attack on their truck. They've been killed. A 6th Jawan badly injured. The attack comes on a day when Pakistan announced and India confirmed the visit of the Pakistani Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari to India for the SCO summit next month in Goa. It also comes ahead of an important meet which is scheduled for G20 leaders who've been participating in India and will continue to do so till the G20 summit in September. So that was planned for Kashmir as well. It is a tourism meet of leaders, I believe. So we'll be looking at all of that, the significance of the attack itself, and what it actually means going forward. Next up on the program, we continue to track the arguments in the Supreme Court on same-sex marriage. The observations of the Chief Justice, very, very important. One of his remarks, we see same-sex relationships not just as physical relations, but something more of a stable emotional relationship. He later asks whether it's time to redefine or refine the evolving nature of marriage. Do marriages need to be defined by a binary gender? In other words, just male and female? Can it be non-linear, as it were? And finally, India is the world's most populous country, but with our demographic dividend comes serious challenges. Where are the jobs to employ so many? I'll be joined by our IT Minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar in a very special interview. He speaks about skill development and how IT and tech jobs from China may be coming to India, which will add to jobs. But he also looks at the overall picture of employment in India and what these numbers actually mean. It's just unbelievable. India now officially the most populous nation in the world. But let's go straight across to my colleague Nazir Masoodi, who joins us now for the latest on the terror attack in Jammu. Nazir, what are some of the details that you have?
Well, Vishnu, at around 3 p.m. today, there was an attack on an army truck, which was several soldiers were traveling in this truck at a place called Bimbar Gali. It is on, Surankot, Rajouri Road. It is between Jammu, Rajouri and Poonch district. So this is not far away from the line of control. But the incident itself is a huge challenge for the largest security. 5 soldiers have been killed. They are injured have been shifted to hospital. Afufa Army has said one injured, so has been shifted to hospital. His condition is stated to be critical. What Army has said, there was firing and then there was a possibly grenade attack on this. But there is similarity between this incident and what happened in May last year, when there was an attack on a bus carrying Mata Vaishno Devi pilgrims. Initially, that was said that it was an accident, but eventually, this police investigation, NI investigation proved it was a terror attack who used sticky bombs, and that caused the death of 4 pilgrims and injured 20 others. And today there was similar incident, like that bus caught fire. Here again we see this army truck caught fire, and fire started from the rear side of the truck, and then it engulfed whole truck, and immediately security force army rushed the area. Whole area has been cordoned off. Why this attack is very concerning for the security forces? Number one, this is the second major attack in the same area in last over 3 months. On January 1st, there was a major targeted attack on innocent civilians because of who they were. They were Hindus and they were targeted because of their identity. So 7 people were killed, or a dozen were injured in those target attacks. There were also, these blasts in attacks in Narwal, Jammu in January only. And at that time, Home Minister visited Jammu. He tried to visit Rajouri but could not go there because of the bad weather. So he asked security forces that within 3 months there has to be zero militancy in Jammu region. It appears to be a message to the Home Minister, and the larger thing is that the theatre of militancy appears to be shifting from Valley to Jammu. We see more incidents happening in Jammu than in Valley, and Valley is curiously very calm. There are not even many encounters now taking place, just few encounters in last 3-4 months in the Valley. So on one side we see a calm, whether it is deceptive or it is real, but on the other hand we see in Jammu, which was largely peaceful, the theatre of militancy shifting here.
All right, and lots of important points that you mentioned over there, Nazir. I'm just going to introduce our panelists at the stage. General Sanjay Meston, General S.L. Narasimhan, General Raj Kadyan, and Ashok Sajjanan, our former ambassador, with us. General Meston, how do you assess this attack, a grenade attack a major ambush. What are some of the details that you're picking up? Your thoughts over here.
Vishnu, Jai Hind.
Vishnu.
Can you hear me, please?
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. The points what I would like to make is, firstly, this was a part of a very small convoy which was moving. Number two, the area which has been selected, obviously, it is a road bend and there is dense vegetation on both sides. So this operation by the terrorists has been well planned and executed. Obviously, they were aware about the timings, etc. And I think the daily movement used to generally take place at about the same time. That is the next point. Now, there is, coming on to the terrain, the vegetation is so dense here, unlike Kashmir Valley. You know, a lot of people feel the reaction in Kashmir Valley is much faster, quicker because the road network is good. That is one. Secondly, it's an open terrain. So therefore, the reactions are much quicker. Here, the reactions become very, very delayed, and the terrorists have also taken advantage of the weather pattern. The weather was extremely bad, lighting and everything going on. So therefore, they have quickly sprung this ambush, and they have melted away into the dense terrain, dense vegetation, and therefore now the focus of the army would be to locate these terrorists, because that would be priority one. And why this has been executed, obviously we are hosting the G20 summit and the SCO, so therefore it is a strong message by Pakistan to embarrass India, and also I perceive that China would also be doing the same things in the near future, especially in 2023. We have to be very, very cautious.
Okay, General Meston, half a second. I just want to, that's an important point, and I wanted to bring in Ambassador Sajjanar on this, because there's also a G20 tourism meet which is expected in Kashmir. Ambassador, this also comes on a day when India confirmed and Pakistan announced the visit of Bilawal, Bhutto, Zardari to India for the SCO meet on the 4th and 5th of May. If there is a terror attack, and this is a major one, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think, thank you very much, Vishnu. As far as Pakistan is concerned and China, both of them, have expressed their opposition to the fact that a working group meeting of G20 on tourism is going to be held in Srinagar next month. And so I'm sure this attack has been long in preparation, because they would definitely like to send out this message to the global community that, it is a place that is not safe. This is a place that, is still boiling. There is still opposition. There is still, as far as people are concerned, they are not happy with the administration and with the government. So I think this message is definitely, they would like to send out. And I'm sure going forward, there are going to be, we need to be prepared for more such similar attacks. Now, you also mentioned about whether there is a correlation between the announcement of Bilawal Bhutto's visit on 4th, 5th for the SCO foreign ministers meeting. There could be, because as I said, the preparations would have been going on for a long time, because the announcement of the G20 tourism working group meeting has been announced quite some time ago. So it must have, the perpetrators must have thought that this is a good opportunity. And as has been mentioned just now, this is a route that is taken by the convoys earlier also. So, it wouldn't have been that they would have had to make any special preparations. They would have known that this is going to happen and this is how they are going to launch the attack. Vishnu.
General Narasimhan, just in terms of what we know about this attack, there were grenades which were used over here. There was an ambush which took place. This was obviously an extremely closely planned operation. It wasn't a hit and run sort of thing. This was an effort at engaging this particular vehicle.
Thank you, Vishnu, for getting me on this show. And around what I get to hear is around 3:45 or so this incident has happened.
Yeah.
And the weather was, I believe, bad, and visibility was poor. In this area, of course, the thundering and the lightning is a very common phenomenon, which was also got to see today. So all these factors seems to have ensured that this attack has gone through in the manner in which it was planned. There was firing on the vehicle, and I believe there was also a grenade that was thrown onto the vehicle. So that seems to have caused the casualties on that particular scene. So the points which have been mentioned by General Meston and Ambassador Sajjanar earlier all fit into the same pattern. though the FATF, the Pakistan has got out of the FATF, but their support to terrorism seems to be remaining intact. And as it was mentioned earlier, the G20 meetings are supposed to be taking place in Srinagar, and this may be one of the ways to probably discourage that meeting from going through. But I think one message should go out very clear that whatever efforts are being made by people, the meetings and other things will go on as planned, and I don't think we can weaken that resolve in any manner.
General Kadian, would you agree with that? That look, let's not stop these meetings as a reaction, or do you believe that this is serious enough for us to tell, for example, Pakistan and their foreign minister, don't come?
Vishnu, in the larger context, I do not think, in my opinion, that they should scuttle the visit of the Pakistani foreign minister. After the security situation in the valley has been largely controlled, the terror attacks had shifted south of Punjab. This is not the first time when the Zardari area has been under attack, as your reporter said right at the beginning. Now we have to look at the reality between Jammu and Poonch. It is 225 kilometers road. At Bimbergali, which is almost 2/3 of the way, it bifurcates into two. The right 4 goes to Poonch, and left 4 goes to Mendar and Balnoi. The entire area is hilly. It is literally impossible to keep every inch of the area sanitized. The convoy is a big visible target, and grenade attack does not require much preparation. You have to lob a grenade from a distance.
Right.
It may miss, it may hit the target. It has done. Very sad that we lost 5 soldiers. But in the larger context, there were indications. On the ceasefire line, there has been relative peace in the last 2 years between the two armies. Terror attacks had gone down. There were indications that India and Pakistan may have a dialogue again.
Right.
Now, obviously, there are elements within Pakistan, given the disparate situation in Pakistan today, who are not interested that the thaw should take place between the two countries.
Right.
So, but I don't think the country should let this single incident, serious though it is from the point of view of the army, we should not let the meeting or with the visit of the Pakistan foreign minister, which will be the first in 12 years and the first in the BJP regime. I think the meeting should take place in Goa or as scheduled on 4th and 5th February.
Right.
But we should look at the larger picture.
Got it. General, half a second. I just wanted to ask Ambassador Sajjanar about that. Sir, usually when there's an SCO meet, there is an effort by our foreign minister to meet the visiting minister. So a possibility of a bilateral between India and Pakistan after a very long period of time was very much on the cards. Not been fixed up, but it was certainly on the cards. Do you believe an attack like this would at the very least affect that?
No, I don't think so at all, because there are certain protocols as far as these intergovernmental meetings are concerned. And, when the invitation has gone, there is no question of retracting this invitation. I don't think it should be done. I don't think it is going to be done. I think, India is a big country. This knee-jerk reaction would definitely not suit us at all. And I am absolutely confident both the invitation will stand, this bilateral meeting in Goa when the SCO foreign ministers meet, that will also take place. Whatever the substantive content, that is quite separate. But as far as the form is concerned, definitely we'll go through the form, and also the working group meeting on tourism. We are not going to shift from there. I don't think the question even would arise. The policy makers and decision makers won't even think about it that an attack of this nature. India is a confident country. We have been able to deal with all these situations in Jammu and Kashmir. We've been able to bring peace, security, stability, and these sort of actions, they are very regrettable. They're very reprehensible that it has happened. We have to up the security situation, but there is no way that we are going to change any of the plans that have been made either for the SCO foreign ministers meeting or for the G20 tourism working group meeting. Vishnu.
General Narasimhan, what are the groups which are now the most active? Are these offshoots of the Jaish-e-Mohammed, which may have been responsible for something like this?
I don't think it's a little premature to come to that conclusion. I don't think anybody has claimed responsibility for this, or anybody has any identification has been received so far. So as per the Northern Command also, they have not given out what group and other things. And so I think it will be premature to probably discuss that. The fact remains that this incident has happened. The armed forces have to be careful about such incidents happening in the near future. Plus, we should not be going back on any of the events that we have planned in the future.
All right, look, I'd like to thank all of you very much for joining us. I'm just going to recap for our viewers the information that we have. A major terrorist attack which took place at about 3 p.m. This afternoon in Jammu and Kashmir. In Jammu, in fact, at 3 p.m. an army vehicle moving between Bhimbar Gali and Poonch in the Rajouri sector was fired on by unidentified terrorists taking advantage of heavy rains and low visibility in the area, is what the army says. The vehicle caught fire due to the likely use of grenades by terrorists. So that's what we're looking at very closely. Indeed, it comes on a day when Pakistan has announced that their foreign minister is going to be here. In fact, in a couple of days from now, will that process be affected? Experts suggest that it should not. We'll take a short break. There's a lot more coming up, including the latest on the arguments in the Supreme Court and the observations of the Chief Justice on perhaps the road ahead. That's coming up. You're watching Left, Right and Centre. Next up on the program, we continue to track the arguments in the Supreme Court on same-sex marriage. The observations of the Chief Justice, very important. One of his remarks, we see same-sex relationships not just as physical relations, but something more of a stable emotional relationship. He later asks whether it is time to redefine the evolving nature of marriage. Do marriages need to be defined by a binary gender? In other words, that they are male and female. Can same-sex marriages actually take place in India in the future? That's what the Supreme Court will pass its judgment on. That will take perhaps a few more months, but one way or the other, it's going to be a landmark judgment. Also interesting is that this is one of the cases in the Supreme Court which is being broadcast live. So you can actually listen in over here to the lawyers arguing and the Chief Justice speaking as well, making a lot of the remarks, or many of the remarks I've just referred to.
You are really asking us to read into the statute the expression spouses for really man and woman.
So does the underlying thrust of SMA exclude your lordship's reading or insertion or understanding of that construct? Is the
because your principal premise is that when the legislation was enacted in 1954,
yes,
the object of the legislation was to provide a form of matrimony for people who are not falling back on their personal law of marriage.
Absolutely.
Right? And not
categories.
You are giving Parliament was intending to provide an avenue to people beyond your religious, the religious governance of marriage, so to speak.
Yeah. There was also an aspect of endogamy.
Yeah.
Yes. There was an aspect of endogamy which we cannot ignore.
Yes.
So it was an all-enfolding kind of a legislation.
And it cut across so many spectrum because it was intended to be a very special category.
After 1954, in the last 69 years, our law has really evolved to recognize the fact when you decriminalize homosexuality, you also realize, well, these are not just one-off relationships. This also comprehends a stable relationship.
Because you go back and say,
by decriminalizing homosexuality, we have not just recognized fleeting relationships between consenting adults of the same gender, right? We have also recognized implicitly, therefore, the fact that people who are of the same sex would be in stable relationships. Now, the object of the law in 1954 was to bring in its fold people who would be governed by a matrimonial relationship apart from their personal law. And surely that law is capable of being broadly read according to you, so as to take into account more stable relationships.
Let me put it bluntly.
The same sex as well.
Let me put it bluntly. When you enacted the law, you did not, in the debate in Parliament, in the writing of the draftsman, when I get up and speak on it, may not have got homosexuals in mind. You may not have considered them.
That makes no difference.
You may know the way which you were perhaps propounding is this provided a framework, but that framework is of the concept of marriage. The concept of marriage transcends contemporary understanding to
It's an evolving dynamic concept.
comprehend an evolving idea of
Dynamic, very dynamic.
Looking at India constitutionally and socially as well,
Yes.
we have already reached the intermediate stage, right? The intermediate stage postulates that by decriminalizing homosexuality, your very act of decriminalizing homosexuality does contemplate that therefore people who belong to the same sex would be in stable marriage-like relationships.
Marriage-like is the operative word.
Right, marriage-like relationships.
Live together.
Because the moment we have said that it's no longer an offense under section 377, therefore we necessarily contemplate that you could have a stable marriage-like relationship between two persons who do not treat these as chance encounters, but as something more than that, not just a physical relationship, but something more of a stable emotional relationship, right?
societal.
Which now is an incident of our constitutional interpretation.
All right, well, joining us now, we've got a great panel. Rishikesh Satavane joins us, as does Zainab Patel. Zainab is a petitioner in this case.
Open.
Let me just go straight across to Zainab first. And, you know, this is what I found really interesting. What the Chief Justice actually said, and it's so refreshing to actually hear it, not just read about it, because it's been broadcast live, is his interpretation of the law on decriminalizing 377. It isn't just restricted to decriminalizing gay sex. It's actually a lot more. And what he said, and I quote, by decriminalizing homosexuality, we have not just recognized treating relationships between consenting adults of the same gender, we've also recognized that people who are of the same sex would even be in stable relationships. How important of an observation, Zainab, is that?
Thank you for this question. I think if you look at a fundamental issue over here, and I'm not talking from a right spectrum, I'm just talking about just as an average human being, LGBTIQ plus people just have the same kind of aspiration in terms of being in a loving, committed relationship where you have a companion for life who will support you to the ups and downs. And it is, you know, we achieved a landmark with decriminalization, but realization of our full rights and responsibilities in a spectrum has to come up with this kind of a case. As an honest, tax-paying citizen of this country, we cannot be exiled to live a life of a second-class citizen. And I think full enjoyment of right, just like any other citizen. एक आम आदमी की भांति मुझे भी वही अधिकार है जो समाज ने अब तक हमसे दूर रखा. So I think we've been excluded from processes and still being told that it's okay to be a second-class citizen as long as you are decriminalized. So I think the idea about us going to court and all of us petitioners going to court, putting our privacy, putting our lives in the front of so many people, millions of Indians looking at the proceedings of the Supreme Court, is
right.
Just to send out a beacon that we are here, we are visible, and what you are seeing in front of you is not a demand for a special right, it is a demand for equal right.
Sure. Rishikesh, let me come to you next. Another quote from the Chief Justice. And we hasten to add that these are observations and not the judgment. So the judgment can be something completely different, but perhaps you know, it's moving in the right direction in terms of rights in this country. But Rishikesh just referred to this. In the last 69 years, our law has really evolved. When you decriminalize homosexuality, you also realize that these are not one-off relationships. These are also stable relationships. Speaking about this is just another relationship. It doesn't really matter if people of the same sex, you know, it's a relationship and it could be stable. This actually places it in the path towards recognizing that same-sex marriages, you know, can be a reality and it wouldn't be any different in a profound way.
So in my perspective, you know, marriage is between two souls. You know, our law a long time ago, or at least our morality said, oh, you cannot do intercaste, you cannot do inter-religion marriage. And, after a period of time, you realize, this is all just, some fundamentalists or people who are afraid or are not knowledgeable enough. They're just creating these barriers, that those barriers have no basis. And the barrier to same-sex marriage is the similar barrier that, 10 years or 20 years from now, people will say, why was it even bad? This is not really a problem in my perspective. Two people wanting to live their life together is nobody else's business, as long as they are being positive and contributing members of the society. That's all that is important. There is no criminal element in two people getting married of same sex.
The lack of the law didn't prevent you from getting married, right? But you can do it. You can do it now legally, hopefully, with a piece of paper in a couple of months. If the verdict goes your way, we don't know. But you never stopped, right? The law didn't stop you or your partner.
I hope so. I got married with my now husband 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago, in India in a religious ceremony. Fortunately, our law was ambiguous, so nobody could come and arrest me. But I had, lawyers on my call just in case something happens. Then, fortunately, after the wedding ceremony, I didn't really have time to go to the court and get it legalized. It's just not my cup of tea. I came back to California.
So, would there be another big wedding party if this actually does happen legally, same-sex marriage?
I'm not so sure, because my husband already said, half a day wedding is already too long.
All right. Shashank Shekhar Jha. Shashank, what again, these are just observations, not a judgment. But I think the observations are important because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Justice Chandrachud also worked on Section 377 and the reading down of 377. This being the case, if he is interpreting this same judgment, right, as sort of paving the path towards stable relationships among same-sex members, is it not an important statement that he's making today? Because it seems to suggest that, look, if we've gone so far, then same-sex marriages are perhaps the next step.
Namaste Vishnuji and every other fellow panelists here. Vishnuji, I think that was very wrong on part of Honorable CJI, with due regards and respect to the bench of Supreme Court. But I don't think Supreme Court, or for that one CJI, can interpret our statutory provisions in any manner in which they want to. As far as the CJI statement is concerned, I will quote. He says that we have never seen ourselves as bound by the original interpretation of the Constitution, so then should be bound by the original interpretation of a statute, unquote. So I think that if CJI is making such an oral observation while saying that they will not think about anything as to with regards to the interpretation or the original consent of the Parliament, for that point they will also overlook all the aspects for which this particular act was brought upon. I think that is worrisome. Also, because of the fact that then there will be a very, there is a very minute difference between the separation of power of Parliament and judiciary. If judiciary will take such calls, then what is our parliaments are for?
No, but I think the point that he was making when he was talking about statutes is that interpretation of those statutes is evolving, just as the interpretation of relationships is clearly evolving. Our laws have changed over 60 odd or 70 odd 69 years, right? The interpretations have changed as well, right? Society is not static, society evolves. We are not based on the past, we are based on the present and hopefully looking at the future. I think that's what he was referring to.
Vishnuji, the only point of difference I have here is that earlier we used to criticize bureaucrats because they used to be inside the AC rooms, chambers without going on ground. And
but they're still there, by the way, but carry on.
No. But then they used to speak for behalf of country without going on ground. Now, judiciary is doing the same thing. With due respect to Supreme Court of India, they are doing the same thing, because this is the duty of Parliament, because they actually represent people of India, and Constitution is very clear as far as the powers of Parliament and judiciary. So if judiciary will try to do what Parliament is supposed to do, I guess that will be worrisome.
Okay. Paras Tomar, the Chief Justice observes, it requires us to redefine the evolving notion of marriage, because is the existence of two spouses who belong to a binary gender a necessary requirement for a marriage? It's the most basic question, right?
I think when we're talking about the fact that there will be a requirement to redefine these relationships, my response to that is sure, if there's a requirement, we will do it. Because, you know, I love the fact that today one of the arguments that was made was about, because everyone is saying, how are these people going to procreate, right? But I love the fact that today there was an argument made, but what about people who want to marry after their 50s? A lot of women who may not be in the age to procreate anymore are still allowed to get married. That means they cannot actually have a biological child. There are also lots of couples who are choosing to be childless today. But what's happening in this discussion is I think a lot of people are beginning to understand that the conventional setup of a marriage or a couple that we thought of as a man and woman is perhaps changing. And the argument when they say we have to rethink all of it, my response to all of that is sure, let's rethink it, because it's important that we actually do that. You know, the other question a lot of people ask me, and I also like the fact that as someone who's very active on social media, a lot of our conversation also is with people from small towns who actually don't know any better and are curious. You know, the one thing, Vishnu, everyone actually asked me was, they said, Paras Bhaiya, if tomorrow two guys get married, if you get married to a guy, husband kaun hai and wife kaun hai? You have to understand, a lot of people asking these questions sometimes is not with malice or the intent to hurt you. Sometimes it's really coming from the perspective of them not knowing. And my response to most people is, that's where that whole funda begins to change, because today we're looking at these relationships as not between a man and a woman. It's about two people who could be whichever gender. The binary and the not binary, notwithstanding. You know, for me, the biggest struggle right now is when I wanted to have a baby. I was talking about the fact that about a month or 2 months ago, I said I'm actually looking for a lesbian couple, or I was looking for a girl who might identify as being a lesbian, who probably wants to co-parent with me, Vishnu, and to have a child, which means that we live our own individual lives. I personally think we're ready for these kind of new commitment. I remember putting out a whole video and a whole bunch of people wrote to me and say, hey, we're rich, we have so much money, so that means we don't want to get married to you at all. We don't want to have a child with you because we want the money. But I feel India is changing a lot. So when people say we'll have to redefine these relationships, my response is, karo, achhi baat hai. The redefinition is a good thing. Like you said, society is not static. Time for us to move.
Priyanka, you know, I think in this, you know, Paras just mentioned the word gender. But is it not true that in this entire debate, the words sex and gender are being used interchangeably when people don't understand that they're very different? Sex is male or female. That is a biological construct. However, gender is man and woman, and that's entirely fluid. It's a question of identification. And therefore, when people talk about male and female in strict terms, biological, on the basis of genitals, you're missing the larger point. That identity is fluid, you know. It's not linear. It's very large. It's across the spectrum.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
1 second, there's some network issue.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. Go ahead. Can you hear me? Would you like to? Oh, sorry, we don't have her. Zainab, would you like to take that question?
Vishnu, I just wanted to add a point over here before I get into the entire sex and gender debate.
Just in 1 minute, because I'm running out of time. Yeah.
Sure. Just in terms of that, when you're talking, and you are exactly right on when you're talking about sex, it's the presence of gonad, chromosomes, etc. While the entire discussion around gender is about the roles that male and female play to become man and woman in society, which is again determined by society. And I just want to refute one point made by the panel members, saying that, you know, haven't people been consulted? What are we? Are we aliens? Are we non-terrestrial life who come to the court? The fact is that no one is listening to us. The parliament is not listening to the voices of people who are even trying to present a private member bill. And it makes us again come back to my earlier contention that, am I a second-class citizen in this country? And an institution like marriage, which has been exclusively the domain of heterosexual people till now, whom we petitioners have challenged today, is protected by religion, by law, and by culture. So an institution like yours, which has been protected over millennia, are now getting threatened because a group of petitioners have come to court. That is the only argument that I have.
All right. Look, I'm going to have to wrap this up, but I suspect, I know that we're going to be discussing this a lot more over the days ahead. And of course, when the judgment comes out, one way or the other, these are just observations. The judgment can be very different. I'm sorry, we just haven't been able to go back to Priyanka. Her line is bad. We're going to move on now to the UN report on population. We've got the Minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar with us. Well, the UN report on population lists India as the world's most populous country. Our demographic dividend means tremendous opportunities for a billion-plus population. But to ensure that we meet these aspirations and fuel economic and social growth, we need to ensure jobs and all-around growth, with policies looking several years into the future. Now, I'll be talking to Rajiv Chandrasekhar, the Minister of State for Skill Development and IT as well. But first, a few key points for our viewers. What does the UN report say? India is the world's most populous country. We have the world's youngest youth cohort, 254 million citizens between the ages of 15 and 24. India's population 142.86 crores versus China's 142.57 crores. 68% of the population in India is between 15 to 64 years of age. In China, this is 69%. Overall in the world, the working population is at, in other words, the population between 15 to 64 is at 65%. Significantly, 7% of India's population is above 65 years, whereas in China it's up to 14%, and the world average is 10%. Life expectancy, India at 72.5, China much better at 79, the global average 73.5, so India is even under that. But India's population projection is that we'll start with a declining population from 2060 onwards. Till then, it's growth and hopefully positive growth. Well, joining us now, the Minister, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar. Thanks, sir, very much for being with us. You know, we are talking about India's demographic dividend. And there are so many comparisons which have been made with China. In fact, it's quite strange because when asked to comment on India overtaking China as the world's most populous nation, the Chinese government spokesperson said, and I quote, "When assessing a country's demographic dividend, we need to look at not just the size but also the quality of the population. Size matters, but what matters more is talent resource. Does India in any way lack talent resources?"
No, I think, look, it's very seldom that I agree with anybody in China, but I certainly believe that the point that they make about the talent of a nation being as important as the size and population of the nation is absolutely correct. And, you know, in 2014, Vishnu, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji came to government, there was a startling statistic, which is that 3 out of every 4 Indians in the labor force, in the workforce, was unskilled. So that was the legacy after almost 70 years of independence, that 75% of those Indians who found themselves working in a job in India were essentially unskilled and were making their life and moving upward without any real formal skills or education. So, and in addition to that, over 1.9 crore Indians joined the workforce every year that were unskilled,
right,
who were dropping out of school and so on and so forth. So that was the opening balance of this issue of creating a talent nation. And I certainly believe that what we have done in the last 8 to 9 years with Skill India and the other various missions in other ministries that were focused on skilling is to slowly and steadily translate this big demographic dividend and this huge base of young Indians into talented young Indians, industry-ready young Indians, future-ready young Indians. And in the recent budget in 2023, the Prime Minister has announced 8,800 crores for the 4th edition of the Prime Minister Kaushal Vikas Yojana, which is PMKVY 4.0, that has in its DNA, in its design, phrases like industry ready, future ready, and that there's a recognition almost that the world post COVID, the workforce is changing, the skills that are required are very sharply moving towards more digital, more high-end skills. And now the more recent phenomenon of AI and the disruptions that AI is creating in its wake certainly lend more strength to the Prime Minister's strategy that we need to create a future-ready talent pool in India.
We'll
And
talk
that's
about
exactly
AI
what
in a
we're focused
moment
on.
because I know you've
Yeah.
spoken about it and you focus on it a lot. But let's also talk about jobs overall. We are now the fastest growing major economy in the world, but according to some reports, India will need about 9 million new jobs every year to keep pace. When that doesn't happen, people rely on the old fallback option, agriculture. So the question is this, are jobs keeping pace?
No, so I think there is this is a interesting problem to have if you look at it very academically, but it's a real political challenge as well. That as the aspiration, first of all, as the population of young Indians increase, as their aspirations increasingly are redesigned and reimagined, that the opportunities that are available to them also keep pace with that. And I think that has been a tremendous challenge generally. But one of the things that the Prime Minister and the government has done very effectively is to start looking at this through very different types of prism rather than just looking at jobs and maybe government jobs and private sector jobs alone. We've looked at entrepreneurship and creating a whole ecosystem of young Indians who are creating businesses, creating ventures, and are becoming job creators outside what was the status quo of the job market and the status quo definition of the workforce and the labor force for several decades. So I think there are many things happening. The Mudra loan, for example, the PM Swanidhi schemes that are aimed at the bottom of the pyramid, bottom of the economic pyramid, also is aimed at essentially creating more enterprise, more micro entrepreneurship, more self-employment, and giving the capital support that is required for all of those Indians who want to certainly continue what they are doing as in terms of micro entrepreneurship, but do so in a viable manner, profitable manner, and not be exploited by money lenders and informal sources of capital. That was the norm for several years and several decades before 2014.
Now, according to Jean Drèze, the economist, wages are a problem because they've been stagnant for 8 years. He points out that we have economic growth, but without an increase in overall numbers of jobs, and that seems to indicate unequal growth, and that adds to an unequal society. In other words, our growth is being fueled by the few.
No, I think one of the problems with looking at this through pure statistics is that you tend to end up with averages that don't tell you the actual trends that are emerging today. And I certainly will take, I will not agree with that kind of a characterization, because what is certainly happening, Vishnu, from my perspective and where we see things, is that there are large numbers of high value jobs that are being created in many sectors. There are jobs being created in the tech space, there are jobs being created in electronics, there are jobs being created in manufacturing, there are jobs being created in Industry 4.0, and in many areas there are very high value, high skill required jobs. What is certainly happening is, because of the disruptions in the workforce and in the changes in the workforce, those who find themselves with skills that they had, let us say, 10 years ago, and are continuing to operate with the same set of 10-year-old skills or 20-year-old skills in a market, in an economic environment that is rapidly looking for much different skills, much more talented skills, much more different types of talent, will find themselves at the receiving end of this wage equation. So this is why we have opened up this skilling program as not just skilling as an ab initio skilling, but skilling as skilling, reskilling and upskilling.
Right.
Encouraging more and more people to say, look, make these lateral movements in terms of skill and your occupation, and move to where the opportunities are rather than sitting in a particular area where the opportunities are contracting and the sector is becoming less relevant than what other sectors are that are emerging. So there is certainly a dynamic change that is underway in the workforce that we are today seeing or that we live in. And I suspect, Vishnu, and I'm not a big astrologer or somebody who does a crystal ball thing, but I see that the nature of the workforce in the coming decade will be one that will constantly be disrupted, constantly require newer and newer skills and newer talent. And therefore, there is a certain ask from those who are participants in the workforce to always try and remain current and try and remain ahead of the curve in terms of the skills that they possess.
Now, according to World Bank data, women in India work outside home at lower rates in India than many other countries. Now, that I'm sure you would accept is, it's something that we need to improve on. It is a huge hurdle for our economic growth.
Yep.
For example, in China, more than 60% of women work outside the home, while in India, it's less than 1/3 that. So, when we talk about skill development and when we talk about overall economic growth, how important is it for that statistic and that reality to be fixed?
No, I think it is absolutely clear, and I think it's not something that anybody will argue with, that women in India have been a large percentage of the participants in the informal sector, and therefore they've been protected less by social security. They've been a lot more, in a sense, living in volatility, and therefore also less exposed to or having access to skills. But at the same time, I want to say this, Vishnu, and I use this as an example because Tim Cook just visited India and he just left. If you look at one of the fastest growing segments of our economy, which is electronics manufacturing, which has created over the last 2 years, one company alone has created over 1 lakh jobs. 70% of those are women. Right. And these are high paying, high precision, really high skilled, talented jobs. Yeah. And these are women that are now, and I visited all of the factories that manufacture Apple products in India. And these are women from absolutely rural backgrounds who have been trained, they have been skilled, and are today producing and manufacturing and or helping in the supply chains of one of the most coveted products in the world. So I think there is a risk in looking at everything in the rearview mirror and extrapolating it to the future. It is certainly the case that women have had a raw deal. It is certainly the case for several decades women were more in the informal sector than the formal. But as we see these new segments of opportunity in tech, for example, one of the great bragging points that I have as a minister of MOS in IT is to be able to say that 48% of the workforce in IT in India is women.
Yeah.
And 70% in electronics manufacture is women. So I think if we look forward, the skills that are available today in high-tech areas, in white-collar areas that are now available to women and men will certainly make sure that women have an equal shot at these new opportunities that the economy is throwing up. Sure. And the government's policies are throwing up.
So you've spoken passionately about AI. You've called it, to use your own words, a kinetic enabler of India's digital economy, and also something that will make governance smarter and more data-led. How exactly is that going to improve the quality of lives, and how is it going to potentially generate employment as well?
No, again, I think the same point, I'll take the last question of yours first. I think the AI segment certainly throws up a lot of opportunities for young Indians to be in that space. But of course, you need to be skilled, you need to have the talent, you need to be, be trained to be really participants in that space. And like I said, the Skill India 4.0 is placing a huge focus on ensuring that students, whether they are engineering students or they're students in school or students in polytechnics, they all have access to AI skills, whether they're AI programming, testing, verification, whatever. So I think that is one, to be an enabler of those opportunities that is going to certainly come up. In terms of AI being the applications of AI, and I certainly hold my view that the AI is a potentially big kinetic enabler of the digital economy, and OpenAI and all of these innovations are showing that to be true. There is certainly the counter argument from people like Elon Musk that says that as we grow AI, we must also have the guardrails and the risk mitigation mechanisms so that we don't see AI getting far ahead of the human race. So that is also true. But in terms of governance, and I certainly see for Government of India and Prime Minister Modi ji's government one of the biggest applications for AI will be about digital government and creating AI in the India stack.
Right.
And you know that one of the banes of the Indian democracy and governance for several years has been the inability, in a sense, to create customized schemes for the granular panchayat and the smallest unit of administration and governance in our states and in our country. And we end up having to do schemes that apply to a state as a whole or a country as a whole. AI will certainly allow us to create much more granular programs, schemes, subsidies for local communities, for the panchayats and towns and smaller towns at variance from each other, customized for that data led by that community's performance and what the data shows up as their need is. So I think I am particularly excited, and the Prime Minister has sanctioned 3 centers of excellence for AI. One of the centers of excellence is going to totally focus on India stack and governance applications to make, as the Honorable Prime Minister said, make our governance of the India Tech-Ed be more data-led and more intelligent and more AI-led.
Now, you've also spoken about how there are, 90,000 odd startups, 10 unicorns in which young Indians are playing a part. Again, since we are talking about fueling our economy, fueling the aspirations of 1.5 billion Indians, how important is that? Unicorns, startups, in generating jobs?
Oh, it's a very important part of this new India's economic model, Vishnu. And I say this because if you just look back at what the economic model used to be in the past, it used to be built around a concentration of 5 or 10 or 15 groups. We call groups, conglomerates, whatever. And you would see in 2010-12, I raised this in Parliament as well, that they were cornering all the capital, they were cornering all the credit, and they were cornering all the opportunities. And so therefore, for a young Indian, the only opportunity was either join the government or get a job in one of these conglomerates. And I think that has dramatically been redesigned and re-architected, where while conglomerates and large companies do amount to a large percentage of our economy, but increasingly, a larger and larger percentage of economic activity in this country is coming from young Indian startups. And I see we have 90,000 startups today and over 110 unicorns. But if you just look forward to the next 5 years, I think that number 90,000 will be in the range of 4, 5, 7 lakhs of startups. And that will become increasingly a larger piece of the GDP compared to where we are today. I think the digital economy currently amounts to about 7 to 8% of the GDP, and the target that the Prime Minister has set for 25-26 is that it should amount to 20% of the GDP. So you can see that type of digital economy growth will only come from startup.
Right.
It'll only come from young Indians and innovators and that their energy and their passion and their creativity. And so our GDP our economic architecture has slowly and systematically being re-architected to being more and more driven by startups and young Indians and innovation rather than the reliance for several decades on just 5 or 6 groups and conglomerates.
Now, Tim Cook has been here in India. Is there a real sense that a lot of high tech, whether it's manufacturing or otherwise, is in the process of shifting from China to India? And as far as Apple is concerned, is it your belief that is actually taking place, that India will be the largest manufacturing center?
Look, one of the great things about being in this job, Vishnu, is to enjoy the feedback from people like Tim Cook and Pat Gelsinger and all of these big leaders of the technology world as we know it, come to India and very honestly say we are so impressed with what India is doing. And I honestly tell you, it is the highlight of my life to be sitting in this position, to hear these big guys come from all around the world and say that India is deeply impressive. And he said exactly that. He said, look, we are so impressed with what India has done in electronics manufacturing in the last few years. We want Apple to continue to grow in India. And I certainly think it's my view, Vishnu, that the Apple India partnership can triple and quadruple in the coming years in terms of investments, jobs, and the just sheer opportunity in terms of not just the Indian market but also exports and broadening and deepening the products that Apple manufactures or gets manufactured in India. So I'm extremely optimistic about that relationship. I think it is a win-win. I think it is not a binary that it is China or India. I think the future will be China and India and Vietnam. And all of us will be part of these more diversified, less concentrated global value chains that the world today asks. Because in the past, it was all concentrated around one country, which is China. And I think the world post-COVID wants a much more trusted, much more diversified, much more resilient supply chain. And India certainly is poised to be a participant in that redrawing of the supply chain, if you want to call it that.
So exciting times looking ahead with our demographic dividend. It is incredible, isn't it? 15 to 64, prime working age, and we've got a huge number. I mean, looking forward 20, 30, 40, 50 years onwards, it really has the potential of defining us, not just in terms of our own aspirations within, but, you know, as a global leader, right? That's the bottom line.
And that is the bottom line. And to just continue to respond to the Chinese the comment about talented nation, I certainly think we are at a historical moment where India can really be a talent hub for not just its own aspirations, but really for the world, and that we are in the process of shaping and helping young Indians become this global talent pool that the world looks forward to working with. So I think it's certainly exciting times, and watch out, China.
All right. Thanks very much, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, for joining us and sharing your vision of the road ahead with this huge demographic dividend that we have. There are so many opportunities, but yes, plenty of challenges as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Vishnu.
Thank you.